think that, while we're in classes with the guys most of the time during the week, one of the things we're able to do here is we're actually able to interact with them. And well, once you get to meet somebody in person, talk with them in person, the communication bandwidth increases. So this has been great. The people that I've met that are also trading, that I'm also in the Rebel Pit with, and we are exchanging text messages back and forth, the camaraderie is just excellent. So I recommend anytime they have an in-person event, you got to come and attend.
Join us this December in Miami, Florida for Market Rebellion Live.
And there she blows. I can hear the water coming off the boat in the background. I started laughing as we were coming on. I can hear that water that's coming out of those bilge pumps or billage or whatever they want to call it.
Well, you're about to hear an ambulance going by too, Pete.
That's not kidding. Although in Miami, I mean, what the hell?
I mean, the world is conspiring against me today, folks. I boarded the plane in San Juan, Puerto Rico at 6:30 this morning. And then tragedy struck. I had to jump off that plane and get onto another one because we couldn't get the doors shut on the jet, Pete, which sucks. So instead of being on a nice private, I was on a freaking jet blue in the middle seat.
Oh, you weren't in the blue mint, man.
So to the guy that offered me the flight on the jet, I appreciate it, but I ain't flying that jet anymore.
Who could blame you?
Yeah. Folks, you're tuned into the Macro Minute. That's all macro.
That's it. That's the full thing right there. 1 minute gone.
You're watching the Rebel's Edge with me, John Najarian, the sometimes frequent flyer, and Pete Najarian, the sports maven and all-around good guy. And we're
what do I owe you?
We're going to give you a little pat on the back, Pete. In fact, if I could, I'd offer you one of these.
Oh, boy. What in the world is that? Is that a croissant or something? Or
the world's biggest croissants.
Good Lord, I'm hungry right now anyway. I got my coffee. I mean, it's an all-red day here, John.
I can tell you're wearing your Nebraska red.
Yeah, it's a red out.
The reason we're giving Pete kudos, folks, is yesterday Pete talked about Baba, and it sounded something like this. I'll let Jared take it.
I'm going to give you Baba. As a matter of fact, we've had 5 different hits, separate hits in the month of November, which is obviously ending today. They started at $72 a share. Here we are at $80 a share. Those buyers, which they were all buyers of calls, have done pretty well on this big rise. Today, we got a buyer of 6,000 of the December expiring 92 calls. So going up into the, out a little bit further, $1.20 for these as well. So with the stock trading 80, these are the 92s. It's going to have to make a heck of a move. Can it do that? Absolutely, it can.
Well, so how did those calls work out, Pete?
Not so bad. Not too bad. Couple 100%. I mean, it's funny, John. I was discussing this with my daughter's boyfriend. We were talking about this, John. We were saying, when it comes to this kind of stuff, it's why when you and I sit on shows and somebody says, you know what, I was right on that one. That stock's up 7%. You and I go, shit, man, we don't even wake up for 7%.
No.
You stay in bed for 7%.
7%.
Because we know there's going to be losses along the way, but when you get 100% or 200% or 500% or whatever it might be, boy, that makes up for a lot of them, doesn't it? It gives you a lot of room to wiggle around. And that Baba had a nice big spike today. Got up towards 89, John. It got over 88. So we're pretty pleased about that one. But now we got to go to the next one. It's just like earnings. You're always looking at the outlook.
That's right. And you got to be disciplined, folks. Am I still bullish on China? If indeed they really are reopening, Pete, if the citizens breaking out of those confinement, either apartments or factories, if they're breaking out and Xi Jinping decides, you know what, I'd rather let them out and have a bunch of people get sick because, of course, they don't really have any vaccinations right now, Pete. So people will get sick and some will die. But it's that or face a revolution. And I don't think he's ready for the revolution. So I think that the Chinese stocks have more room to run, but you've got to be disciplined. That's what Pete and I would do. We can't pull the trigger for you, but we can tell you we would take profits and at least roll up. If you don't take the whole thing off, at least roll up to a higher strike, taking money off the table. That's the way we play it, right, Pete?
Absolutely. Now let's rock and roll on the macro minute and get this thing started. Let's get the party going.
All right. Well, it goes right back to China, Pete.
Yep.
Because, you know, Guangzhou, that district has had its vaccine mandate. No, instead they've had lockdowns. That's how China's dealt with it. And they're basically lifting a lot of those lockdowns because those people in particular were just done with it and they weren't going to stay in any longer. That's my macro minute, Pete.
I'll just add to that, John, that you talked about BABA. Do you think it's over or do you think it continues to run? And I guess that all comes down to what exactly China does, right? And how they react. And from what you were saying, and I think you're exactly right, dead on, that he's likely going to want to move forward from here. We are seeing so much activity, John, in the Chinese ETFs looking to the upside. We've talked about it, you and I, for a long time. It's been the ETFs, and we finally got some of that paper. Well, and I say finally, in the last couple of weeks, we're starting to see more and more option paper in those individual names, like BABA was yesterday. And we've seen that time and time again. But we're also seeing ETFs trading like crazy in China to the upside, looking for even more. Some massive trades, but you know what? We can't give you everything. We're just going to give you some ideas on where to look. So that's my macro.
All right. Well, that was pretty dang good, though, Pete, especially that BABA trade. Again, I had the K-Web yesterday, Pete, but I've got another one for you today, I think. Take a look, though, at CrowdStrike. Let's start off with the stocks that are in the news that you and I are trading, Pete. CrowdStrike, CRWD. This one peaked at $240 a share. It hits a new multi-year low today of approximately $108 a share. If you held this thing from anywhere near 200, 220, 240 down to here, I don't want to say you're an idiot, but you probably are a little mentally challenged. How about that?
I think you'd probably be right. And as a matter of fact, John, people are reading through this and going to some of the other names like Zscaler, like Sentinel-1, and those are getting hammered as well. CrowdStrike, last I looked, was down somewhere between 18 and 20%. So definitely taking a hit. And like you said, John, 52-week lows, multi-year lows. This is a stock that's gotten absolutely crushed. And it was crushed even before today, but it just continues on. It's gotten pretty ugly. Yes, they beat on the top and the bottom, but they were also talking about some of the outlook, which is what we always look for, right? We do want to know how did it go last quarter, but then after you got that information, you always look forward. And we're looking at that outlook, which was disappointing. And because of that, that's why the stock is getting absolutely slammed. In this name, as much as I like the cybersecurity world, John, I'm not ready to say, you know what, maybe this is time to start bottom feeding. How about you?
I think we are getting close, Pete. And here's the reason, folks. Down and dirty, the quick reason is that they said a lot of people had put off their security needs until next quarter. That means we might have some pent-up buying next quarter, which would mean, to me anyway, that they could beat and outperform. So yes, on a significant dip like this, Pete, I would be a buyer. Just as on a significant run to 240, I would have been a seller. I'm saying I'm agreeing with Pete, and I'm a buyer here at this level. All right, Pete, we said we'd get back to Chinese stocks. We're back on it right now with XPEV and Li, as well as NIO. I mean, all of these Chinese EV stocks are running up. And you know why? Because if you let people out of their houses and they can actually go do something, they're likely to go do it. And some of the things they might go do, Pete, is go spend some of that money because they've basically just been locked up with nothing to do except eat, I suppose. Now they can go out and buy some stuff.
Yeah, I think you're right there, John. And I also think that a lot of what they were worried about with supply chain, all of that type of thing. Let's also remember this is a stock, when you look at XPEV, that specific name, this is a stock that was $49 at the start of the year. And now after this huge 40% run is still trading 10.50. So
Yep.
is there a little bit of room? Sure, there's plenty of room to run. Are they going to have the vehicles that they need? Well, that's still something that we'll have to keep an eye on. But they did talk about some better margins as well, John. And I think that's something that people were kind of clinging to as well. And I think we're seeing one heck of a run today. Is it a little bit of a short squeeze? I didn't see a whole lot of shorts necessarily. So I'm not sure that's a factor either, John, but maybe it's just because it's been hit so hard that maybe we're seeing enough of a move to the upside. Could it continue? I think it could, but that's all going to happen as the time goes by and we see how much loosening we get. Are people going to be able to spend more? And will the newer vehicles be attractive to people? I think they will be.
Yeah. And in particular, of course, Tesla, just like an Apple iPhone, is an aspirational purchase in China. Mm-hmm. Their EVs, whether it's BYD, LI rather, Leo, Neo, or XPEV, all of those are much lower priced. They're not anywhere near the Tesla or the Lucid sort of prices. So I agree with you, Pete. They're going to go out, they're going to buy something for transportation, and they're going to buy it EV because it's being supported by their government, just like it's supported here. Yeah. All right, State Street. They were going to be doing a deal with the investor services business over at Brown Brothers Harriman. And this would have created a very interesting thing for State Street, Pete, because obviously STT, it's a big trust company. By trusts, I mean, of course, some of the largest accounts in America are in trusts. And, Chicago Trust, State Street Trust. There are so many of these that just have, basically approaching $1 trillion sort of deposits, Pete. And these guys, though, not spending that money, they've basically agreed to break off these talks. Mm-hmm. That means that stock, Brown Brothers Harriman, is not being acquired, this investor services, which means they're not spending the money at State Street. Stock's up.
Yep. And they raised 10 or 2 billion, John. So that's going to go back into go back to the shareholders, which is great. Yep. And you talk about the renegotiation process. That part got really interesting. And you wonder, John, they're obviously not giving us the truth because the negotiations, it should have been done. It could have been done, but it's not been done. Why is that? Well, it seems to me like State Street got a little cold feet. As they got deeper and deeper into this thing, they decided, you know what, maybe this is just not going to work out. And all of a sudden, the next thing you know, the red tape is all over the place. And now they're out. Probably a good decision on their part. That's why we're seeing a pretty nice pop today. As a matter of fact, I think, John, maybe we've seen the lows now for State Street, and it's got a little bit more room, I think, to the upside based upon what they do, how they do it, and this specific transaction being canceled. That money's just going right back to them.
I agree. And I think, Pete, that State Street is a hold. It's one of the strongest banks around in the United States. And we have a lot of strong banks. We're very lucky. The ones that needed to got the bailout. Even if they didn't need it, they got the bailout in 2008, great financial crisis. Yeah. And they're in a lot better shape than virtually any other global banks. Yeah. And State Street, being a trust company, has that next level of safety, I think, Pete. Yeah. All right, let's talk just for a sec, Pete, about EL. This is Estee Lauder. And it was only up $1 on the opening, but then it jumped pretty dramatically. Now, I know that they have a conference a week from today, Pete, December 7th, next week. They have a conference that they're going to be speaking at, the Morgan Stanley Global Consumer Conference. And that appears to be what's driving the interest in this stock.
What's interesting to me about this one, John, is the stock has struggled. And why has it struggled? In my opinion, it's because it trades 40 times earnings. And I'm going to give you a good example of what I mean by that. That trades 40 times earnings. And I look over at Ulta, which trades 19 price to earnings. So much cheaper. Now, they're basically near their 52-week highs when you look at Ulta. And then you look over here at Estee Lauder, and this is trading, well, it was $150 off of its highs for this 52 weeks. So off significantly would be what I'd say. But I know what's going on here, John, because you and I both have seen this time and time again. There's got to be something newsworthy that's going to be coming out about this sometime between now and that December 7th. I don't know what it is. You don't know what it is, but something is going on there. And there's certainly, we're going to be reading about it, and we're going to be keeping an eye on the unusual options activity for this specific name, because it just seems a little bit odd, John. The stock was up $1. Now it's up $10. We don't hear much about it. They've got this fireside chat, as you mentioned. I wonder what they're going to be chatting about. This could be pretty interesting.
Yeah. And the one thing I'd throw out, folks, I'm not saying Pete's wrong about this, but when he compares them to Ulta or Sephora, any of these kinds of companies, those are resellers of exactly what Estee Lauder makes. Mm-hmm. So Estee Lauder has more margin. Now, on the other hand, the other guys, Pete, all they've got to do is maintain a store, right? They're getting all this product in, and they make a margin on that, somewhat similar to Apple with the App Store. It didn't cost them anything to make the new makeup. But if it's a hot new makeup, they come into Ulta and they buy it there. And the margin is thinner because of the competition, whereas Estee Lauder has to make theirs, and they must have a much bigger margin, in my opinion, Pete. Yep. So that's just one thing I'll throw out there for folks.
Sure.
All right. Sure. Let's talk about Shell, Pete, because yesterday on 3 at 3, which happens at 3 p.m. every day, I talked about bullish call buying. And today it's back. SHEL. They're buying the April 60 calls. So that gives people the right to take stock at 60, a stock that's trading 57.5. So these are $2.50 out of the money, Pete. Now, if China reopens, I got to think demand for energy of all sorts is going to pick up. Now, Shell is only up 50 cents today, Pete. So it's not like, it's exploded to the upside. It's only up a little. I think this is a nice play, especially because you have a little bit of time to be right in this one, because these are April calls.
Well, as a reflection of what John was just talking about, here's where I'm going to go to, John.
All right.
Energy. We got 5 hits in the first hour or so of trade today in the energy space. You have Shell as one of your unusuals. I'm going to give you MRO for my unusual. Gives you an idea of how much energy we are seeing. And folks, this is exactly what the type of energy buying that we were getting 2 years ago. It was November. It was the presidential, and suddenly we got surprised by what happened. Suddenly it's Joe Biden who's in the president's seat. And then all of a sudden oil started to just rip to the upside. We saw the buyers of calls every single day. You and I would talk about it. I think the price at the time, John, was close to $30 a barrel. And then it just rocketed over the next couple years. And so here we've taken off a little bit. Take a look at this just this week alone, John. We were trading $73 on Monday for crude. We got up over 81 today. Gives you a little idea of just how active things are. But we had a buyer today of Marathon Oil. Now this one, what I like about this one is, this is what I call those high beta names. This one's going to move at a 2.5 times. That's the beta that we are seeing in this particular stock. That's why I like it, number one. Number two, I really like it because I see some huge buyers. 8,200 of the January 33 calls were getting bought for $1.25. They're spreading those off. They're selling the Jan 36 calls against those. They're also selling the January 25 puts. I don't want to confuse everybody, but when it's all said and done, they actually only put out 29 cents for this trade for 8,200 of these January 33 calls. It reduces down that price because of what you're selling to the upside. You're limiting your upside, and what you're selling to the downside, which could come back to bite you if the stock were to get hit pretty hard. So we'll focus on the 33 calls at $1.25, 8,200 of those. I like what we're seeing in the energy space, John. There's a whole lot going on right now, and they are buying calls, it seems like, in just about every aspect of energy.
Yeah, and if China does unlock, we keep saying if, because, they're letting certain provinces go a little wider. If they unlock completely, Pete, energy demand is going to go through the roof. Yep. So even 81 will look really cheap a month or 2 months from now if that happens. All right, Pete, what do you got as far as sports bites today?
All right, so here it goes, John. How about college football? I called this the carousel because 17 different head coaching positions in college football were available. They started firing guys in the first couple of months of the season, as we recall, going back to Scott Frost at Nebraska. They started firing head coaches. They did it at Wisconsin as well. They did it later on, and when you get to the end of the season, there's always a few others out there. So here's some of the top ones that they've already filled them already, John. So Auburn's got Hugh Freeze. Nebraska got Matt Rule. Wisconsin got Luke Fickell. Arizona State got Kenny Dillingham. But here's the one that I think of all the jobs out there, and you and I probably would agree on this, but you might disagree. It's fine if you do. I love the Stanford job. The Stanford job is an incredible job. Why is that? Because they have limitless money. They've got deep pockets. Why is that? You ever heard of a company called Google? These guys give Stanford a boatload of money, John, so they can go out and find who they think is the best coach that's out there. One of the names that everybody will talk about is Chris Peterson. He was at Boise State, did an amazing job. Then he went to the University of Washington, Pac-12. That's a tie-in. He did an amazing job. 147-38 was his record as a head coach, John. But I'm going to give you a name that nobody else has. Bill O'Brien's out there and Bronco Mendenhall. How about this name? Troy Taylor. Now, you might not remember him, but he was a Cal quarterback. The guy was absolutely outstanding in college. He had a little bit of a pro career. He's coached just about everywhere, including Cal Berkeley. He was back there for about 4 years. Quarterbacks, tight ends, receivers, he did it all. He's been just about everywhere. And then he went to Sac State. Now, I know that's a smaller school, but he knows California. He knows Stanford. He knows the area. And all he did this year was go undefeated and go 11-0 in FCS. So he's had an unbelievable career there, 29-7 in his record. I think Troy Taylor is a nice dark horse to get this Stanford job, and I think he deserves it. He's a Bay Area guy, born and raised. He's coached high school football there, John. He knows Cal. He knows Stanford. I hate saying it, but you and I have seen a lot of different coaches go from Cal to Stanford, Stanford to Cal, maybe the 49ers. They just go wherever the job is. I think this is and I think this is an unreal job. Do you agree that it's a great job? And do you agree that maybe he's got a shot, Troy Taylor?
I agree it's a great job, Pete. And I agree, of course, with the ability for the Stanford alums to pay this coach whatever they want.
Yeah.
I'll point out that the two of the top two teams, let's see, Nick Saban, Pete, his team, $11.7 million. Mm-hmm. Kirby Smart, $11.25 million. Dabo Sweeney, Dabo, however you pronounce it, Pete, $10.5 million. You know what surprises me on this list, Pete? I'm looking around and I see Ryan Day at Ohio State, $9.25 million. You know what Harbaugh's salary is? $7 million. Now, we both know he already coached at Stanford and then came back to his home school, Michigan. And obviously there's tax considerations here too, because if he were to go back to California, his tax would double.
13%.
Yeah, 13% versus I think 5.5% up in Michigan. I'm not positive of that. But Jim Harbaugh could also be in consideration, Pete, because he is way underpaid based on what he did to Ohio State the last 2 years. And this year he did it to him at Ohio State.
Yep. No, I think that's a good call. I think they'd want him. I don't know if he'd go or not. I don't know if Jim is a guy, John, that if he goes back to anything, it might be NFL, but I think that's a good call. It certainly would fit. And by the way, I'm not so sure that they might not change what his salary is anyway, John, after what they did this year and the trip to the championship game, and probably going to be in the playoff as well. So here's number 2, John. Playoff. Here's number 2. College basketball slide. Now, you and I follow a lot of college basketball, more than probably most people would think, because Dad was always a Golden Gopher ticket holder. He and I had the Timberwolf tickets as well at the NBA level. So we do like our basketball. We had some great teams at Minnesota. But how about this slide, John? North Carolina came into this year ranked number 1. They won 5 games in a row. Things looked really good. And then a little bit of a slip. They lose the next 2 games in a row, which is kind of unusual. And they've now slid to number 18. That's kind of brutal. They lost to Iowa State, unranked. They lost to Alabama. It was in 4 overtimes. Nonetheless, they lost. So it makes it a very, very interesting thing because they have a guy on their team, Caleb Love. They also have a guy named Armando Bacot. They're supposed to be probably somewhere in the upper parts of maybe the first round or something like that. Not surprising. North Carolina always has that. But they have been sliding, John. Now they're number 18. And you know who they get to play tonight just to see if they really belong either at number 1 or maybe out of the top 20? They get to go to Indiana, number 10. And you know who one of their forwards is at Indiana? Race Thompson. You and I know him because Darrell Thompson is his father. Darrell was a first-round draft pick of the Packers from the University of Minnesota. His son, Race, is only a 6'8", 240-pound beast in the boards. The kid's a rebounding king. It's going to be a really, really fun thing. But have you ever seen anybody slide that fast, though, John, where this early into the season, they go from number 1 to number 18, and they might drop out of the top 20 if they lose tonight?
They could. And if they do lose tonight, they will, Pete.
Yeah.
But I'll point out that both St. John's and Connecticut in the Big East are undefeated, both 8-0. So there are some really good basketball teams. And unlike, and I think Kansas State's also undefeated, Pete. There's a bunch of undefeated teams. Yeah. It's early. But there's a bunch of really good basketball being played, and not all of it's ACC. So, for all the folks that think that, it's all about Duke, and it's all about Virginia or NC State or North Carolina. It's not just about those. Connecticut, St. John's, a bunch of those teams are really good in the Big East too.
Yeah, and the Big Ten's not too bad either. So I think we got a lot of great conferences out there for basketball. So it should be a lot of fun. We'll see how it all plays out, but it's interesting to watch that fast of a slide from a number 1 team. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, folks, thank you for joining us. I'll be back with 3 p.m. today. Pete will be absent tomorrow, but we will still have a Rebel's Edge tomorrow because the one and only Mark Lepresti, our sports maven, will be sitting in for Pete. Yeah. And he's been boning up on sports down here, Pete, so we can have a conversation about that. But no, I'm really happy that Mark's going to be joining us tomorrow. Yeah. And, I can't say enough nice things about him or about you, Pete. I hope you get back quick, and we'll look forward to being back with you Monday next week.
Yep. I got to get out of this snow and back in the sun. Enough of this snow.
See you, folks.